So we cobbled it together and learned that we had over 12 million people in our industry, 2 million small businesses, and we're worth over $1 trillion that nobody was talking about. We were bigger than the US auto industry, and the government didn't know it. So that's a problem. It's a massive problem.
Welcome to another episode of Production Value Matters, the Business Events Podcast. Today, I'm really thrilled to welcome Wendy Porter, the founder and chief event strategist at Wendy Porter Events. Wendy is a trailblazer in the events industry with over 23 years of experience designing impactful corporate events, trade shows, leadership conferences, and much more. Her work has earned her numerous accolades, including being named one of Eventex's 100 most influential people in the U.S. events industry, and received the 2024 Smart Women in Meetings Visionary Award. Beyond her remarkable career in event design, Wendy is a passionate advocate for the live events industry. As Vice Chair of Government Affairs and board member with the Live Events Coalition, she's been a driving force in advancing representation for the live events industry at the federal level, including lobbying over 100 members of Congress during the pandemic to secure critical relief in the industry. Her efforts continue today, working to ensure the industry is properly recognized with NAICS codes and addressing the unique challenges faced by the live event professional. Wendy's leadership and dedication reflect her deep commitment to growth, recognition, and the future success of the live events industry. That was a mouthful, but welcome, Wendy. Thank you for coming on the show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So to kick things off, could you share what first inspired you to step into the world of events? Like what motivated you to take the leap and establish Wendy Porter Events?
Well, I actually fell into events in my corporate role back in the day, 2002. At the time, I was an acquisition marketing manager. That had been my history up to that point. And one day the VP of marketing came over to me and handed me a folder and said, "Here, we're doing this trade show. We're sponsoring it. You do it." It's like, okay, I'll figure that out. Right. So it was a big trade show with a partner that we had at the time. The plan was for me to do that trade show for like 2 years. Right. So, and then roll it off to the next person. So nobody ever had that as their main job. So I did it for 2 years, had an assistant, tried to roll it off to her. So they pulled it back and said, "Nope, okay, we're actually going to create a position for you. And now you're going to take on conferences. You're going to do CEO leadership meetings and national sales meetings and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." So it kept growing. So for 13 years, I headed up the events division for our company and did all kinds of events, up to 350 a year with my team. And then fast forward to 2015, after we had done a huge event out in Vegas, got home, 48 hours later, they told us we were let go. That was fun. So I had it always sort of in the back of my mind, had this idea of starting my own company. And that was the nudge that I needed. When they let me go, I sort of knew instantly that that was my plan, that I was going to start my own company. I felt like I had the name value and the name recognition. You know, people knew my events. They appreciated my events. I had great contacts, you know, in the industry, and just decided to launch my company. So that was nearly 10 years ago. Started Wendy Porter Events. So it wasn't really to fill any kind of void in the industry. It was more of a personal thing for me. I wanted, you know, life balance and kind of to get away from the corporate crazy for a while.
So you said that you weren't trying to fill a void, but was there anything in particular that you were looking at in the industry when you wanted to address when you started your agency?
You know, not really. It was more personal reason. You know, I just wanted more control over my life. I wanted to get paid for every hour that I worked instead of working 80 hours and getting paid for 40.
Yeah, it's funny that you say, that life balance. I don't know if you chose the right path.
Well, I mean, yeah, the industry is challenging just generally, right? It's at number 5, I think, most stressful job, right, on the top 10 list. So that never goes away, right? But at least I had a little more control over how many events I was doing at a time, the types of events I was choosing to do. So that was really my focus at that point.
So let's talk about some of the work that you've done. You've been known for creating events that truly sort of wow attendees. How do you define that wow factor, and what core elements do you believe are essential to achieving it?
Yeah. So for me, I think the devil is in the details, right? Yes, you need to plan strategically on a sort of a high level, but you really also do need to focus on the small details. And so I think that's what really sets my events apart from others, is that I really do get focused on the details because I think they matter. So we call it the cranberry thread in my company. One of my brand colors is a cranberry color. And so it's weaving the cranberry thread all the way through everything we do. So from the very beginning, right? So you create an event, you have a theme, whatever the starting point is making sure that there's continuity from the second someone is aware of your event all the way through the back end of it. So, like I said, creating those pieces and making sure the details are in place. And so people really start to get embedded in it. I also really like to think about the five senses because you're trying to create a memory, right? You're trying to create something that people, 10 years from now will think back on and remember. And the way you do that is by engaging the five senses. And so I'm really mindful of that as we're doing our planning to how can we trigger those emotional connections for people that will either force them sort of to take action, because that's what we want them to do. Events are, you have goals for them to do something after the event, but also to remember it. So my main tips on that.
So when you're starting to plan an event, can you go a little bit more into detail about that thread and what are the sort of first steps in connecting those dots with that thread?
Well, it all starts with goals and objectives, right? So it's meeting with my clients and understanding what are they really trying to do. So having a really deep conversation about what are the goals? What are you trying to get out of this? What's the point of having this event? Why are we bringing everybody together? I always say, if you can do it on Zoom, don't do it in the room, right? So do something different because you've got everybody in the room. So it starts there. And then we sort of try to think about, okay, what is the outcome? What are we trying to get the person to do? And then kind of reverse engineer it. So the goal is this, and then how do we work backwards to make sure we're building the content and everything from the very beginning that ties back to that goal. So every decision we make should have a reason. There shouldn't be any fluff, in what we're doing. Everything should matter and build on that goal and objective for what you're trying to accomplish.
And so how do you start to prioritize some of those goals and objectives? We call them outputs, which we'll go into it in another time. But how are you prioritizing those goals and objectives when faced with particular budget or time constraints? Because everybody wants everything out of their event. You then have to prioritize what those outputs will be, and then you have to balance that with budget and time. And so how are you prioritizing those things?
That's a great question. Again, I think it's a deep dive conversation with the client. What are they really trying to get out of that? And then you have to sort of match up what you're doing to accomplish the most important things that they're trying to accomplish. I also think it's important to set the stage early. So with a lot of my clients, like I'm talking to somebody right now that wants to do a brand new event. These guys, they're doctors. They've never done an event before. I don't think they really understand how expensive these are. So before we even got too far into it, I sort of laid out a budget and said, this is about what you can expect to spend based on what you're telling me you want to do. And a lot of these vendors require 50% down, at hotels. And even if you're having people pay to come, you still have to put that money up front and then you'll collect it on the back end when people register. But do you have that kind of funds right now to put that out? Right. So it's really trying to help educate the client, I think, on the front end about how expensive these things are. If you have a champagne taste and you're trying to do it on a beer budget, well, what does that really look like? So tell me your budget and I'll tell you what we can afford to do with that budget and how it will work. So once we sort of get that stage set, then things start to fall into place. You kind of know where you can spend your money, how deep you can spend into it, what your AV probably needs to look like to keep within the confines of the budget. So it kind of really, again, goes back to that initial conversation, really having a deep conversation about what you're trying to get done, what kind of budgets do you have, and what can you do with all of that.
And so do you think, what kind of trend are you seeing right now? Are you seeing that, because it's a familiar conversation, right? That, pre-pandemic, certainly throughout the pandemic and now post-pandemic and into the sort of new economy that we're going to be sort of opening up in the next little while. Is that conversation just as hard as it has always been to educate clients? Have you seen a change in that recently?
Yeah, I think it's harder right now. I think there's a lot of things that are harder. We have seen research that 50% of the people in the industry now are both new to their jobs and new to the industry. Right there, that's a challenge. So, vendors that we're working with at hotels or caterers or convention centers may be new to this world and don't know what they don't know yet. So there's quite a bit of education that I think needs to happen and partnering with people to make sure they're executing on what we're trying to get done. And then budgets are as tight as ever, right? So, and you know as well as I do that costs have gone up, 30 something percent since 2019, maybe more. I think we're year over year, at least 5% a year. And budgets on the other side have not kept pace with these cost changes, right? So we're all trying to work with the same budgets as we had before the pandemic and do more with it. So we have to get smarter at how we're spending those dollars, investing in lighting, for example. There's a lot of things you can do in lighting that will really change a room that doesn't really cost all that much. Or I just did an event last year where to get the energy up in the room, we had the football tunnel, like you see on football, football on TV. And we had all of the leadership with their pom-poms, which cost us $2 a pom-pom, standing in a tunnel and, congratulating people as they walked in the door and getting the energy up and making people feel really welcome. That really didn't cost us anything to do that. And it set the stage for a really great, event for the team. So you just have to get sort of creative in how you do things and to maximize your budget.
Yeah, as I said, I just kind of find that it's a familiar conversation. This is, if anybody knows me, they know I'm a big sci-fi nerd, so I'm about to quote something from a sci-fi thing. But all of this has happened and all before, and all of this will happen again, right? So that. And bonus to anybody who's listening who knows what that's from. It's funny that it's that client education about budgets, the story that you just said about, this medical conference where it's somebody new coming into it, and combined with your statistics said 50%. We've heard statistics recently of over almost 70% of the industry is new to their job or new to the industry completely.
That's true. There's a 70% stat and a 60% stat. And if you roll them together, it's 50% of the overlap is new to the job and new to the industry.
Yeah, which is like, I think it's not unexpected. It's surprising, but not unexpected, especially after.
Well, we had a lot of people retire during the pandemic. We had a lot of people that had to exit because they just simply needed it to pay the bills. Right. So they had to go find a job of some sort. And so they figured out that they could still make money and not be in this industry. Right. And so.
Yeah, 100%. There was many times during the pandemic that I thought of going to engineering and or business school to go do something else. But then I'm a glutton for punishment, so I decided to stay. So can you share like a memorable story of an unexpected issue that arose during one of your events and how it turned into an opportunity to elevate that experience?
Yep. So this is quite some time ago. So before dial up or dial in was a thing where you could go in and pull down files from the cloud, we had a presenter who was speaking for a keynote at a conference, and he was told to bring his laptop with his session on it. Well, you know what happened.
There's a visceral muscle in my body that twinges every time somebody says that. But yes, I understand.
And there was no way for us to get access to it because this was before you could VPN into the system and pull stuff down, and we didn't have it. Luckily, we did have handouts that we had pre-printed. So what he ended up doing was we had nothing up on the screen, right? But he had the handouts. And so he just embedded himself in the audience and walked around and was like, okay, ma'am, we're on page 30 now, and just made sure that everyone was following along with what he was talking about in the handouts. And afterwards, he came over to me and he said, okay, that was actually the best session I've ever done. Because I got so much engagement with the audience. They were really in tune with me. It just felt a much more engaging experience. And so from that point on, he always embeds himself in the audience. So it's kind of Phil Donahue style, where he's in the audience running around with a microphone and talking to people and really engaging with the content. And then that actually ended up leading to a column that he ended up writing about this same kind of content and a book. And we ended up on it with a PBS show out of that whole experience.
I think that's a brilliant, to go off on sort of concentrate on one of the points there. What I think that demonstrates is, I think the one thing that as event professionals and practitioners as we are, we constantly go into those meetings with leadership and with presenters and say, well, what if we could do this? And what if we could do this? And we get a lot of resistance from it. They want to do the Steve Jobs in front of a cool visual and speak at an audience. And especially post-pandemic, we're seeing a lot of that sort of, I need to get away from that. And so this is a great story to share about Yeah, I mean, it was a very negative consequence. It did twitch that muscle when we
Oh
started
yeah,
to talk
we
about
were
it.
scrambling.
Yeah, 100%. But the fact that that's proof in the pudding of let's throw away the slides. Let's actually make this an interactive and engaging piece of content to tell the story. Because I believe that in telling that story, all I heard was, oh, this is a really engaging way to tell the story that person wanted. And they got the crutch of their presentation slides and their graphs and their copy and their visuals taken away, and it went back down to engaging with the audience, telling the story, and asking people to follow along. And I love the fact that it turned into something, that it was like a light bulb moment of, oh, we don't have to do it this way, we could do it this way. I love that story. That's thank you for sharing that with us. So okay, going back to what we were talking about, though, there's unexpected stuff that happens. One of the things that we like to say is that the events industry is full of people who have contingency plans for contingency plans. So what systems or contingency plans do you usually put in place to handle those kind of challenges?
Well, let me tell you, after that, we had his slides because he was a repeat speaker quite a few times. We had 16 ways of getting his presentation. We had it burned on discs. We had it on laptops. We had it on flash drives. Yeah, that never happened again. So, that's one of those things, right? With every event, you learn something, every single one. I don't think there's been a single event I've done, and I've done over 1,300 events in my career, that I haven't learned something that then goes into the playbook for how we're going to do it different next time. It's really paying attention to the things you can learn from, documenting them so that you can refer back. We have a whole process where we do a postmortem where we lay out, what went well, what didn't go so well. How can we mitigate for that in the future? And then that gets built into our processes as we move forward. So again, details are kind of what we do. So
absolutely. So let's go into a little bit of the aspect of personalization in event planning. From your experience, what does a true personalization look like in an event setting, and how does it take an attendee experience to that next level?
That's a great question. So again, we talked about the cranberry thread, right? It starts at the very beginning. So we did a conference for a client, I guess it was about 2 years ago, and our keynote speaker, we got her engaged actually before the event even started. So I had her create a video where she was speaking to the audience and getting them excited about the content that she was going to bring to the table, and starting to sort of tee up what was going to happen and sort of tease some things to generate excitement. So it started with that. And then when we, launched registration, and we had, she talked about that. Registration's live, come in now and, get all set to come. And then when we did the Know Before You Go, she did another video. Okay, guys, we're 4 days down, here we go, flying to Arizona. And, so she just brought in that personalization. And so when everyone got to the event, they already knew who she was. They already felt like they had sort of a relationship with her, which I think was great. And again, she had the messaging on point. The theme was integrated. The colors were integrated. So there was this continuity right from the beginning all the way through with her on stage. She was, not only did she do a presentation, she was our MC. So she stayed with the group for 2 days. She was at the after hour dinners and receptions and really engaging with the team. So we wove that all the way through. And I think that, felt really personal for folks. And then they were so excited about her and how much they loved her. They're like, well, you have to come back next year, right? You're coming back. So she became sort of the MC for the group, and she would come back and continue the work that we were doing on culture development. And she knew the group and she knew the leaders at that point. And so that made it, I think, really personable and very relevant for the team.
So let's talk about event or ROI. We talk a lot about, as I said, those outputs, right? Whether it be sentiment, data, business objectives, or content, which is another whole thing we're going to talk about. But ROI can be complex to measure, especially at events. Are there specific metrics that you prioritize when evaluating the success of an event beyond sort of attendance numbers? Like, do you measure qualitative or quantitative?
Yeah, that is such a challenging part of what we do. There has been a lot of work done around that, I would say, even, during the pandemic and after, really helping us figure out what metrics are important and which ones we need to capture. There's also some technology now that's come out that's really helping, I think, to gather some of that data, some of the sentiment data. So we have a number of different measures that we're looking at. We have several different models that we've got where it's not just about leads, right? It's about, looking at loading into your CRM, using your tools properly, first of all, loading into the CRM, and then following it through if you've got a sales team and that's what you're working on, following it through and making sure you have the right kind of information in that CRM so that you're following up properly. You can capture information, like with lead capture systems now, where you can record the conversation while you're talking to somebody so that you can get little nuggets out of that conversation, which then can go into your CRM. So when you're following up, you're like, oh, how's Bobby doing at whatever college he's at, or how's your dog, such and such, so you can really personalize those follow-up conversations with customers. But then back to the metrics, it's getting survey data, it's getting engagement data. There's AI technology out there now. I don't know if you're familiar with Zenus. You ever heard of Zenus? I think it's amazing, right? You can put that, in a room and it can capture audience reactions during keynotes or at a trade show. How many people really walk by your booth? The promoters of the trade show will tell you, oh, we have 5,000 people coming to the show. Well, how many of them actually walked by your booth, right? You kind of want to know that, right? So if you engage technology, you can get a lot more information, make smarter decisions. There's also some interesting platforms like VivaStream, if you've heard of them, where they will take all this data that you have, which data is just data, right? You got to analyze it and do something with it. So they'll take all these different sets of data, marry it all together, and then help tell your story. So they can actually get it down. If you're capturing it properly, they can get it down to tell you a story about a person that was at an event and, this person stopped by your booth and they did these things in your booth. And then, they stopped by your session and sat in your 30-minute session. And then you had them at your reception. They showed up to your reception. Now, you know all these things about that person and how interested they really are in your product. So it's, there's a lot of different pieces you can get, but it's about pulling it all together, understanding that data and telling that story really by person, right? And how you need to follow up by person.
Yeah. And do you think as an industry, we're doing a really good job generally of gathering and analyze?
Yeah, I think we're getting better. I think the pandemic, we learned a lot during the pandemic. I think the virtual side of the pandemic actually gave us a lot of data, right? Because when you're on virtual, you have a much easier way to capture that information. So I think that sort of started the ball rolling with people going, okay, look at all this we can learn when we're doing this virtually. Why not do that in a live setting? We just have to figure out the technology to capture the same kind of information. And so that's now coming about. Zenus didn't exist before the pandemic. AI really wasn't a thing before the pandemic. It is now. So it's really leaning into the technology that's out there and utilizing it to the best that we can to understand this information. So I think it's exciting times.
Let's look back at 2024. What are some of the accomplishments that you're most proud of in your career for the events industry as a whole for 2024? Are there any specific events or initiatives that stand out as milestones for you?
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned that in your lead-in. I had some recognition this year, which was pretty exciting. So the Smart Women in Meetings Award for the Visionary Award, which that was August in Vegas this past year. I won that. So that was pretty exciting to be included in that group of women. And then the EventX top 100 individuals in the U.S. events industry was also pretty fun to get that recognition as well. So yeah, so we had some nice national recognition.
So as we look ahead to 2025, what trends or innovations do you think will define the next sort of decade of event planning and production?
So I think it's really a continuation of what we've been seeing since the pandemic. We have been seeing people really focused on more smaller gatherings, more curated groups of people so that we really can develop those relationships. We sort of lost that relationship building ability during the pandemic, right? I think being in Zoom calls and stuff, you sort of forgot how to interact with people. So people are sort of relearning how to do that. So live events are going to continue to be really important. They are now the number one channel for ROI and trust building, which I think is great. And we have the actual research now to prove that. So I've been saying that for 20 something years, like they're super important, but we never really had the research. Now we do. So I think that's super important so that we can elevate that with leadership and so that it can get prioritized properly. We can get the right kind of budgets allocated. We can get the right kind of resources allocated. So I think we'll continue to see events being really important from a marketing perspective, but then also from a relationship perspective.
So there's one thing I just want to jump on before I ask you an expanded question on that. One being that the proof and the research that is coming out to confirm what I think event professionals always instinctually knew, and that's that growth of the trust factor and the best ROI from a live experience. What I wanted to sort of follow up on is that trend to the smaller events. And because funnily enough, we see another trend where the larger are getting larger, but there's a widening. Do you see this widening gap the way that we do, which is that there are more volume of the smaller, intimate, curated kind of event volume coming up? But that divide between that and sort of the mega conference, the larger scale, it's becoming, there's more of a wider gap. Is that something you're seeing right now?
Yes, I think that is true. But I think people are having to be more particular about the events that they're attending. With travel having gotten so expensive, they really have to pick their shots for the year. So if they're going to industry conferences, they might be prioritizing one or two versus, pre-pandemic, maybe they went to 6 or something, right? So I'm seeing a lot of customers really having to call back on how many trade shows are they attending because they can't afford to do 30 shows anymore with the costs going up the way they've gone up. So they've had to get really smart in, okay, we can't do 30. We're going to have to prioritize 15. So which ones, right? So because of that, because people are attending less, I think you are seeing shows getting bigger because probably fewer shows in industry. I think we're going to see some fall by the wayside. Customers are going to have to decide which ones they can afford to attend. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, but it's that middle, right? Like that's the trend. So if you're the industry of red shirt manufacturing, right? As you said, there is this trend where you have these cool executive dinners, really bespoke, curated experiences with 20 people. Or you have what used to be 5 different events in 5 different regions with, 20% of the audience, 20%, and then 50%, and some mix. Now those 20% of the market share are starting to be either absorbed or just evaporate, so that the only 2 events that, if you were in red shirt manufacturing, that you would be able to attend would be a 20-person dinner at this fancy restaurant on a golf course and or going to Vegas to do the mega show. And so that's an interesting challenge from practitioners like ourselves who have to advise clients and guide them through that of the diverging strategies and really like how engaging do you need to be in such a large setting? Because now you have 100% of the audience. There isn't as much opportunity as you would have to hit those outputs like data, sentiment, business objectives, and content. It's harder to do that in the big. It's more meaningful to do it in the very small, but there is a critical sort of, it's almost like economically the middle class. If the middle class is eliminated, is that a risk for the industry and practitioners and for clients?
Well, we recently went through this with a client where we helped them develop a scoring system because when we initially talked to their leadership, we asked them, we said, okay, what events do you want to go to in 25? We got 60 that came back. We're like, we can't do 60. So cull it down to like 30. Tell me your top 30. And then we're going to go in and do a methodology against that, a scoring methodology to try to help you figure out which ones are the right ones. So their biggest goal for the year was growing new business. And so we looked at prospect lists. We looked at, okay, what are your 20 companies that you're trying to get into, right? And where are those companies showing up? What events are they at? And so we did a whole scoring system, really analyzing that information, analyzing the opportunities. What can we do beyond the booth? Because you're right. When you have such a big show, and so many booths on the show floor, getting their attention is difficult, right? So you got to be doing something different, first of all, to get people's attention. But also, what are the other opportunities going on that we could potentially sponsor? So can we get a speaking spot? Can we sponsor, be part of a reception or create our own reception? What do those look like? So really honing in on that and giving that a score. Thinking about, do we need to be there because we just need to be there politically, right? So talking about that. So we had sort of 4 different categories that we took them through and put some scoring against it and weighted it based on how important that score was, and then rank ordered it, and there's your list.
Okay, so what do you predict will be one of the biggest challenges if affecting our industry in producing events? Are there specific trends or things that you're seeing, keeping an eye on, that there could be a boon or a challenge and create new opportunities in the industry?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think the continuing rise in costs is going to continue to be a challenge. We also have something coming up called the silver resignation. Have you heard about this?
No,
So
this is
I've
a
got
new
some,
one to me.
I've got
But
some
I can
stats.
guess what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got some stats in front of me that will talk about it. So pre-pandemic, the workforce was average age 53 to 58 with 20 to 30 years of experience. Those people are going to be aging out to retirement fairly soon, right? Now we have 40% of our industry has just 3 to 4 years of experience. So we've got some challenges ahead of us from an educational standpoint and from a pipeline standpoint, from a talent standpoint, to get new people in our industry. And that sort of dovetails into some of the work we're doing on the government side and the federal side, is trying to get programs stood up, working even at the high school level to start to show kids, that maybe are really technical and might be a great fit for an AV company, getting them exposed to some of that work early on, and then getting them into almost trade show type, not trade shows, but the trades, going to community colleges and things like that to get trained on a pathway into the event industry. So there's some work happening on that front to help get some new talent in. So I think that is a big risk for what's coming here in the next few years. And like I said, just the cost continuing to go up, I think, is going to continue to be a pressure. We also need to be mindful of what's our next crisis going to be. So we just went through the pandemic. That doesn't mean that's the end of it. And so we need to really be unified as an industry. And that's why the government affairs work that we're doing with the Live Events Coalition is so important. NAICS codes, you talked about a little bit in your intro. For those people who aren't familiar with that, it's the North American Industry Classification System is what that stands for. And when we stood up the LEC during COVID and tried to pull together the data to show the government how big we were, it was really difficult because we did not have a code to pull it all together. There are over 30 NAICS codes that are part of our industry. So you got planners under this code and caterers over here and AV guys over here. And, it's such a broad array of people that are involved in the tapestry of this industry that it was really hard to quantify it. So we cobbled it together and learned that we had over 12 million people in our industry, 2 million small businesses, and we're worth over $1 trillion that nobody was talking about. We were bigger than the US auto industry, and the government didn't know it. So that's a problem.
So we, on a previous panel episode, which I don't think is aired yet, as of the recording of this, we touched on this subject, and I brought you up, and I brought your efforts with the LEC to unify a NAICS code, because I think that it's sometimes this industry. I sometimes struggle to call it an industry because, to your point, there are, what did you say, 32, 22? Like there is
over 30 NAICS.
Over 30. Yeah.
Yeah.
Different industry codes that are used to describe different industries or industry sectors that come into the market of meetings, incentive, live events, all those kind of meetings, incentive, conventions, and events, the MICE thing, which is a term that we sometimes use. So trying to unify those is a challenge. But, I love the statistics that you have shared online and through various platforms about that scope and breadth of this market, that it is, as you said, bigger than the automotive market. It's, over $1 trillion, that 2 million, what is it, 2 million people working in the industry?
2 million small businesses,
Two
12
small,
million
yeah.
people.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, like those are impressive numbers. And
Yeah.
without some kind of unifying, like whether it be a NAICS code or an initiative, we are being underserved, and we are sort of under the radar. I think it comes from, to go back to the beginning of your story, where this wasn't something that you went to school for and pined over as a young person, trying to figure out their career, like myself, who came from a theatrical industry and an entertainment industry. I kind of fell into it, and I thought, oh, this is kind of cool. I'm going to go over here. And so it's really encouraging to see those changes, but I think that there is a lot more work to be done. And, through your work with the Live Events Coalition, can you share with the audience some of the work that was done over the pandemic, and what sort of future initiatives you guys are going to be working on?
March 2020, Isaac Rothwell. I don't know if you know that name. Isaac put a survey out because he realized we were going to be in trouble if this pandemic really played out like it was looking like it was going to. And so within the first week, he had put out this survey, and overnight had, I think, 600,000 signatures or something crazy on this this petition/survey. And he's like, okay, this is something. We got to organize around this. We got people out there that are scared, and their livelihoods are going to be impacted. And what can we do to try to help lead them through this? So he was actually the one who founded the Live Events Coalition. And word started getting out once he put that survey out, and people started finding out about it and getting involved. And so I started actually with the Minnesota, standing up the Minnesota chapter, and then got more involved at the national level. Learned that we needed to work at two ways. We needed to work at grassroots at the state level, right, to try to help get programming in place for local money, but also at the federal level. And that's where we realized the feds had no clue that we existed, right? We were the guys in black by design, try to be quiet behind the scenes. It's all supposed to be magical. They show up and it's just done, right? They have no clue what it takes to put on all the events that we do. So we started pulling all the information. We were able to hire a lobbyist. We did some fundraising. We hired a lobbyist out of DC that helped guide us and teach us how to do grassroots lobbying. We stood up our government affairs team, and we started pounding on doors and, studying committees and figuring out, okay, who are our key people? Who do we need to talk to? Putting the word out and getting constituent stories, with people telling what happened in their world when they were shut down. We didn't have a choice. We were not a restaurant that could do curbside pickup. Live events were dead in the water. And so we had to tell those stories. So we just started learning how to do it. I met my colleague, Dwayne Thomas, and I met with over 100 members of Congress. I was fortunate that we have a couple of Congress people here in Minnesota that were on the Small Business Committee in the House. And so we got their attention. And so Dean Phillips, who has now left the House as of this last election, but he spearheaded, he and Angie Craig, both from Minnesota, spearheaded the initiative, and Dean's team wrote the bill with us that we presented to the House. We actually got it through the House, which was pretty amazing. And then unfortunately it failed in the Senate. I think we lost by like 3 or 4 votes in the Senate. So we did not get the funding pushed through, but we were then on the radar, at least. The government now knew, okay, this is a thing. And, especially the Vegas members of Congress, they had a big awakening, like, we need to fight for this industry, right? And so we just literally had a meeting with them last Monday, had a meeting with the reps in Vegas to talk about this NAICS code issue, to talk about that we need to get that fixed so that we can quantify our industry, that we need to get funding in place. And the federal government does have funding for educational programs, but you have to follow the system, and you have to have your jobs described in the system, and all that back end work has to happen, which starts with NAICS codes and job function codes. It's complicated, but it starts there. And once it's in the system that way, then we can work it up into getting funding and grants stood up that will funnel into high school systems, trade, community colleges, university programs, it'll help fund, like if even me as a small business owner, I would be able to access potentially some grant funds to bring interns in to study and learn within my organization. I have interns now, but I pay for them out of my own pocket. This would then provide some funding from the government to say, hey, we want you to teach these young kids how to do this stuff. We're going to help pay for your intern program. So those are all the types of things we're working on right now. We also have some challenges that are further downstream with some monopoly things that are happening in the industry that I think we want to pay some attention to. But it takes a long time. Grassroots organizing is a lot of work, a lot of hours, and it's literally one by one meetings with members of Congress.
You're absolutely right. And thank you very much for doing that work. As I said, I've been paying attention to you on social media since we connected. And that particular initiative for the NAICS code, I think, is one of those key steps that will sort of unify a disparate economy into a single pillar. And then once that happens, I think that opens a lot of doors. And I think puts that I think anybody who's listening who just heard $1 trillion, because we've heard, the events industry, the convention industry, it does like this much, like billions and billions. And it was always sort of anecdotal data, but it's an interesting reframing of that statistic to put it into like the automotive industry. Like a lot of the economic policy of the incoming administration is being driven by the hope of growing that industry. But if there's one that's like twice as big, like is the administration going to turn around and be like, no, we're building event venues and all of that across the U.S. to replace manufacturing? I'm being very extreme in that example, but if those numbers hold true, there is a possibility that there could be that much socioeconomic weight behind something that we're doing, and that's an exciting possibility. Again, I'm dreaming off of the top of a cliff here, but I love the work that you guys are doing with the LEC, and I hope that continues. I always like to end these episodes with some practical advice for the listener. We've been talking about how to design experiences, what the challenges are going to be going forward in the industry. So to our listeners, are there practical steps that you would give them as advice to get started on mitigating those risks, getting in front of or building that process? As you said, that, what was it, the cranberry? If somebody is listening and thought, oh, that's a really great idea, what practical steps would you give to a young event professional listening to say, here's how you get started on that?
So I think the good news is that there are programs now, in the university settings to help train young event professionals. That didn't exist when I was in college. So I am tapping into that. I've got interns that work for me from Iowa State right now, actually one intern from Iowa State, and it's awesome, right? She's part of the team. She brings, new perspective, and she's learning, all the things that I can show her, processes. And I actually looked at her curriculum before I hired her. I'm like, I want to see what you're learning about. And I was blown away. It's amazing what these guys are learning. So I think, that's part of it. If there's an interest in what we do, getting involved, volunteer. If you're a young person and you think this is something you might enjoy, volunteer. Try helping to plan an event and see what it's like. Get in the trenches. I also think it's really important that executive leadership is in the trenches. At least one time I did a post about this. They don't really understand what goes into an event unless they actually do it. And so I feel like from an executive standpoint, getting them at the table and being in the trenches with you at least once will give them a whole new perspective on what really goes into an event and why, when we're screaming about resources and support, we're not kidding. We need the help. I think, the trust is super important as it relates to events. And the more that leadership trusts us, and we say we need extra people, they need to trust that we need extra people. I'm not going to go tell a surgeon how many people he can have in the room to do my surgery. So I think it's just leverage the programs. There's a lot of education out there. Get involved, volunteer, volunteer with LEC. If that's something you're interested in, you'll learn a lot doing that. I think that would be my response on that.
Perfect. Well, Wendy, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today. And if anybody's interested in getting in touch, where's the best place that they could find you?
So our website, wendyporterevents.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, Instagram right now. all under Wendy Porter Events. So easy to find me.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Wendy, for joining us on the podcast. And of course, if you are interested in learning more about LEC, there's going to be links in the episode, Wendy Porter Events as well. And if you want access to other resources, feel free to subscribe at productionvaluematters.com. Thank you again, Wendy, for joining me. And it was a great conversation.
Thanks, Matthew. Appreciate it.
Production Value Matters, the Business Events Podcast, is brought to you by Byrne Production Services. To learn more about Byrne Production Services and how we can achieve your business goals with meaningful event designs and elevated production value, head over to byrneproductionservices.com. For tailored AV consulting, check out theavadvisor.com, where you can book a free 15-minute consultation. Also, be sure to search for Production Value Matters, the Business Events Podcast, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for listening.